Good afternoon. My job is to welcome you to this important event. My name is Roland Anglin, and I'm the Dean of the Levin College of Public Affairs and Education. We're so happy to see you this afternoon. Housing and the role it plays in downtown revitalization and strength is critical to what we do, what you do, and what this city is about. So you have a sacred trust this afternoon. You have to figure out what we do next and how to do it well. So with that, I will turn it over to our hosts, other hosts. I believe it's going to be Michael Deemer, who is President and CEO of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. Michael?
Thank you, Dean Anglin, for hosting us and for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I am Michael Deemer, President and CEO for Downtown Cleveland Alliance, and it is our pleasure to introduce today's housing demand study. I'm going to say a few words about the study before turning it over to the staff that really managed this project through to give you a summary. Then we're going to have a reaction panel discussion, and I believe some opportunity for Q&A before we close it out. We decided to do this demand study now because coming out of the pandemic, I think there were a lot of questions, there continue to be a lot of questions about the future of cities, the future of downtowns, and how has the pandemic really impacted them. We had great plans back at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2019. We'd actually done a housing demand study with urban partners based in Philadelphia that came out at the end of 2018. And the reason we did that was because we'd seen all this growth in the downtown housing market. We'd seen the residential population grow. We had the fastest growing residential downtown in the state of Ohio. And we were starting to encounter questions about, is the market saturated? Do we have too much supply? Is there enough demand to continue to justify developing and building up the residential base in downtown Cleveland? And that report answered those questions with a resounding yes. And we had great plans heading into 2019 and 2020. And of course, we all know what happened the last couple of years. We have seen a lot of housing development over the last 5 years, and you'll hear about that in the presentation. The strength of the downtown housing market has been critically important to downtown through the pandemic. If you think about it, downtowns thrive when we can bring people together to live, work, and play. And over the last 3 years, we've been limited in our ability to bring people together to work and play. The residential base was the foundation that really kept small businesses afloat in downtown Cleveland and was so essential to positioning us for the future going forward. But coming out of the pandemic, we kind of had to ask ourselves the question, is that demand still there? Is it the situation that we saw at the end of 2018, the beginning of 2019, is that demand still there? Do we need to be doubling down on growing the residential population in downtown Cleveland? So who better to work with than to bring back Philadelphia-based urban partners to work with us once again to answer those questions and really dig into the demand for housing in the greater downtown area, to look at how the surrounding neighborhoods are impacted by downtown's continued growth and what opportunities there may be to accelerate that growth, what needs to be done to diversify the housing in downtown, what types of public policies are needed to complete downtown Cleveland's transformation from a sleepy central business district into a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood. We brought together a terrific team and a terrific collaboration with Greater Cleveland Partnership and Downtown Cleveland Alliance to lead and project manage this work. You're going to hear this evening from the two staff members that really managed and led this project in working with urban partners. You'll hear from Vice President of Economic Development and Chief of Staff Audrey Gerlach at Downtown Cleveland Alliance. And first, you're going to hear from Greater Cleveland Partnership's Vice President for Development Finance, David Ebersol. So David. Good luck.
All right. All right, I got the password right the first time, which doesn't always happen, so that's good. So, our presentation, again, we worked with Urban Partners, and this is the background on the results of the study, meeting downtown demand for housing in Cleveland's greater downtown neighborhoods. Scope of work. So like Michael said, we wanted to update the 2018 study to recognize a couple of key points. The expansion of the residential rental housing construction market into the west side neighborhoods of Cleveland over the last 5-10 years or so, and to really understand the shift in market conditions and where our market conditions are today in light of the substantial changes that have taken place in our economy over the last 3 years or so, and really put us into an economic situation that hasn't been seen in this country for probably 30 or 40 years. Conclusions, what do we find? Demand remains strong in this segment. We've seen population growth, we've seen steady rents with some growth, we've seen steady and strong vacancy rates. And what did our qualitative survey tell us? People want to live downtown. The problem, supply has not kept up with demand, especially in two segments of the market, for sale housing units and what's called the so-called missing middle that falls in between affordable housing and the top of the market housing. And what do we need in order to solve this problem? We need to work together between public, private, and nonprofit stakeholders to collaborate to find ways to build more units here in Cleveland. Where did we study? In addition to the downtown core, which was really studied in 2018, we added the west side neighborhoods of Cleveland because we've seen a lot of shift, a lot of evidence that those two markets are really becoming like one market over the last 5 or so years. What did we find out? Population growth across the board. Since 2010, this whole area has grown by just over 20%. Our downtown core has grown by nearly a third. The west side neighborhoods have grown by just over 10%. And we've seen a huge growth in students living on campus, over 30% growth in that population over this study period. We also added a qualitative survey. We surveyed about 700 people who live or work in downtown. Why do people want to live in downtown? They want access to their work. They want access to the amenities of downtown. What are the biggest impediments? Cost, and really a lack of the preferred housing type in downtown, those for sale units, larger units. About half of the downtown population works outside of Cleveland. About half of the people that live in downtown work remotely at least part of the time. So we're seeing, again, the qualitative side matching the data, telling us that the demand is still there. Where did these residents come from? A little bit more than half, 60%, came from downtown and near west. So you're seeing some cycling within the communities, people who move downtown, live downtown, stay downtown. And then about a third from outside of the city, outside of the downtown area, 10% from outside of Cuyahoga County generally. What did we see in the market over the last 5 years? Over 5,000 units have been added since 2017. In the pipeline today, we've got another 3,700 units that are working hard to come online. We need to continue to build those units and then continue to grow in order to be successful. What did we see about home ownership? Again, we mentioned earlier a lack of home ownership. Cleveland lags by 3 to 4 times downtown home ownership compared to many of our peer cities, at just over 6%. So when you look at our comparative downtowns, many of them are all over 20%. Even if you add in the west side neighborhoods, you're still at just over 20%. So you're still below the average of our peer cities here in Cleveland in for sale housing units. Finally, Urban Partners came up with a projection for 2032, how we can expect to see housing growth over the next 10 years in downtown. Good news, we could see as many as 10,000 people added into our downtown core over the next decade. That's going to require us to build out almost 6,400 units of housing. We've got 3,700 in the pipeline. We've got to get all those built, and we've got to build pretty much all that again in order to meet this demand. So how are we going to do it? To answer that question, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Audrey Gerlach, who's going to talk about the policy recommendations that came out of the report. Audrey?
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. So as we began wrapping up the study portion of this project, we worked with urban partners to develop a few strategies that would help us maintain the momentum that we've seen across greater downtown in terms of housing development, as well as make progress in the areas where there is still room for growth and improvement. So these recommendations fall into three key areas. First is to continue the momentum that we have seen in market rate rental housing. So this includes, first and foremost in this environment, monitoring the impact of changing economic conditions on housing development, rising interest rates, rising costs of construction, challenges with labor, et cetera, as well as to monitor the impact of changing housing development policy on the state and local levels. Once we kind of understand how all of that will impact the market, we'll have a good idea of kind of how to guide our public policy advocacy in this space going forward. Also, we should pursue placemaking to enhance downtown's livability. It's central that we actually have a place where people want to be, that's attractive, where there's fun things to do, strong multimodal transportation access, a vibrant retail storefront economy, good public spaces and parks. You know, the list really could go on, but essentially if we want to continue to grow our residential population, we have to have a place that's exciting and enticing. The second recommendation area is to diversify the housing mix in downtown toward home ownership. As David highlighted, we continue to lag our peer city set in for sale housing inventory, and there's just not many opportunities for most folks to purchase homes within the greater downtown geography. So here I thought we could get a little creative. Strategies include developing a loan program to make it feasible for developers to include for sale product into mixed use or mixed tenure developments. Right now there's a little bit of a formula. We see a traditional approach to developing mixed use in this market where there's retail on the ground floor, maybe a few floors of office, and then predominantly market rate rental on the rest of the floors. A program like this would make it easier to build dense for sale housing integrated into projects like that and promote, remove some of the risk in developing for sale in this market. We also may advocate for state-level tax credits and second mortgage programs to make it easier for workforce households to purchase homes in the greater downtown area. So essentially, as we develop more for-sale product in the market, making sure that it's attainable for a broad swath of the population. And finally, in this space, we plan to identify sites and opportunities for development of for-sale housing product, including things like high-density stacked townhomes and the like. And then finally, the third recommendation area is to maintain and expand housing diversity within downtown. This includes preserving existing affordable housing product so that even for the long term, we are intentional about maintaining what we already have that's affordable or that suits the missing middle that David mentioned. Build more workforce rental housing product, which is something I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists shortly because there's at least one big project that I think we're all excited about that moves us closer to this goal. And then finally, advocate for expanded resources to develop affordable housing and to make it feasible to finance affordable housing projects in the greater downtown area. And these incentives can exist both at the state and local level. So that concludes our presentation of the report. I'm now excited to turn it over to Michelle Jarbo, enterprise reporter for Cranes Cleveland, to moderate our panel discussion. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First and foremost, can you hear me? Okay, great. So I'm going to go through introducing our panelists, and then we'll jump right in. And we have reserved some time at the end for audience questions. So sitting next to me here is Teresa Metcalf-Beasley. She's chair of the Public Law Practice Group and a member of the Real Estate Group at McDonald Hopkins. Her work spans many things, including development, commercial real estate finance, and public-private partnerships. And I would be remiss to mention, since we're sitting here, that she's also a graduate of the CSU College of Law. And then next is Cheryl Yetka. She's the Key Center Asset Manager for the Millennia Companies, which is a major downtown property owner with an apartment portfolio that spans hundreds of properties in 26 states. Millennia owns several apartment buildings downtown and is working on the Center City's largest redevelopment deal, the mixed-use makeover of the former Union Trust building in East 9th Street and Euclid Avenue. Some of you might know that as the Huntington building. Some of you might know that as the 925 building. It's going to be the Centennial. That project will include workforce housing, market rate apartments, a hotel, offices, retail, and dining. And then lastly, we have Scott Skinner, who is Vice President of Development and Director of Public Policy for the NRP Group, a national apartment developer based in Cleveland. He oversees deal origination and pre-development work in Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, and leads federal advocacy efforts focused on building up affordable housing. NRP is also working on a 316-unit apartment project on Scranton Peninsula, just across the river from Tower City, one of the projects that's bridging the gap between the near west side and downtown. So I'm going to kick us off with a conversation about your housing choices, and I'm going to start picking on Cheryl because I know that you rent an apartment downtown. So tell us about that, when you moved downtown, why, and what the experience has been like for you.
Okay, I like to be picked on first. Totally fine. So I moved downtown approximately 7 years ago, and that is when Millennia bought Key Tower and the Marriott at Key Tower, and I quite honestly was sick of driving up and down 77 from Stowe, Ohio. So my children flew away from the nest at our house, and so I was able to move downtown and had a good experience looking at all the apartments. I'm a block and a half away from Key Tower right now, which is fantastic. And I don't have a car. I haven't had a car in 6 years.
And then, Scott, you live on the near west side, right?
That's correct.
So what drove you to locate there, and how difficult was it to find a house in Ohio City?
Sure, yeah. So I am not a Cleveland native. I moved here almost 5 years ago after grad school. Looked for an apartment, ended up renting in Ohio City. Our NRP's offices are located downtown. We're in the Halley building right across the street. So I was looking for something close to downtown, but also something that had parks and places where I could let my dog off the leash. We eventually, my wife moved here as well. We wanted to stay in the neighborhood. We wanted to stay in the city, so we bought a house in Ohio City. This was in December of 2019, so just a few months before we would be spending all of our time there. And it was, I think we put offers on 3 or 4 places before we were able to actually get this home. So it was challenging finding the home.
And then, Teresa, I know that you work downtown and you live in the city of Cleveland, though you're on the east side. Would you consider moving downtown, and if so, what would it take?
You didn't give me that question ahead of time, but, so that's a great question. And yes, and why do I live where I do? Because I'm 7 minutes away from my parents in Cleveland Heights, and they watch my dog every day. So doggy daycare. But would I move downtown? Absolutely. I work here, I play a lot downtown as well, so yes.
So one of the opportunities identified in the report is to get more people who work downtown to live downtown. The study found that only 2.1% of downtown jobs are held by downtown residents. So to all the panelists, how can we get more downtown workers to move downtown? What do you think would help move the needle on that?
Why don't you take that one first? Because we like to pick on you.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I'm fine being picked on. I think that, first of all, you have to try to get into the actual buildings and the businesses that are here in Cleveland and get the message out about, different apartment buildings downtown and what they have to offer. You can have employment discounts for large companies, for those people who are moving downtown. And I think that there are a lot of people in my age category that don't think it's important to live downtown, but it truly is. So I think it's a matter of really just focusing on those companies that are already here and trying to speak to them directly so that they can get your information out.
I mean, I think the answer to that is yes, and it's focusing on companies that are already here and continuing to try to bring new companies and new businesses into the downtown CBD. When you get more folks working here, you will get more folks living here. I think the second part to that question is, in the report, exemplified this pretty strongly, is new quality product gets filled. The occupancy rates in downtown and the near west side are very high, considerably higher than what we would consider a mature market, which just goes to show me that if you are building quality product, whether that is rehab, whether that is new construction, affordable workforce market rate, people do want to live here. They're just looking for really high quality, newer options.
And I would like to add, you can also show the value, affordability. You don't have a car and you don't pay car insurance.
Yes.
So,
And I don't have to pay for parking.
so that's a cost savings. And some of you may be familiar with University Circle, Inc. They had a program to incentivize people to live in the area where they were given, don't quote me, but maybe about $10,000 a grant.
This is the Greater Circle Living Program where
Yes.
there are incentives for buyers and renters.
Yes, for buyers and renters, and to upkeep your home, but it didn't, the hospitals, various organizations contributed to this program to incentivize people to live in the University Circle area. So we can do that for downtown Cleveland as well, and this could be the employers as well. If you want your employees back in the office, what better incentive to say we will help you with renting or we will help you buy a home?
We talk a lot about rental up here, and I know nobody on this panel is a for-sale housing developer, but I'm curious about your thoughts on how we can increase home ownership opportunities downtown, since clearly we are way at the bottom of the pack.
Well, I can tell you that at the Centennial Project, we attempted to create for-sale housing. And it's very difficult to weave that into a capital stack and condominiumize that portion of the building is really difficult. So,
Well, and you're using historic tax credits there, right?
Correct.
So you couldn't sell them for a while.
correct. So it is just very complicated, apparently downtown, more than I knew until I got involved with the Centennial. So that's why we decided to not go in that way.
And it's also affordability. So in the report, we talk about 28% of your income goes towards housing costs. And when you're not making a lot, that's a big portion of your income. So how do we help homeowners fill in the gap? Is it, what type of down assistance can we provide? And this is policy driven. But that's what people say they are missing. They need help coming up with the down payment and having that diverse housing stack. It's not just for sale, townhomes, condominiums, but having diversity so that people can afford to live downtown and buy their first home or second home.
Yeah, Michelle, I think you hit on one of the most important parts of that. On a per unit basis, single family townhome construction, which is predominantly what you think of when you think of for purchase, is much more expensive to build in terms of construction and land basis on a per unit basis. In a market like Cleveland, really everywhere, you need subsidies to be able to build these things. Tax credits. Almost anything that you see downtown that has an affordability component is financed, at least in part, using historic or low-income housing tax credits. Both of those programs are not conducive to building home ownership at scale. The way that the actual financing works, the way that the subsidies work, they're not really conducive to building home ownership opportunities. So that is one of the challenges in terms of actually including for sale product in the downtown market. I don't have a great solution for you, so I'm just going to sort of end this here.
Sure, but it's clear from what you all said, it's a supply side and a demand side dynamic. We need to address things in terms of purchasing power for households and then address product.
I would add, and I did think of a solution while you were saying that sentence. In other markets, we see pretty active land trusts, which are companies that can hold lands, keep them affordable, keep single-family homes affordable, keep them tax exempt. Columbus has an affordable housing land trust that does a lot of work. I know here in Cleveland, I believe Tremont West and Ohio City Inc. Partnered together to create a land trust and is working on some single-family homes on the near west side. That's another just thinking creatively, another option that we have to try to encourage more for-sale property here.
Cheryl, can you talk a little bit about what Millennia knows about its tenants in terms of where they're coming from, where they go when they leave, and what they're looking for in an apartment or a downtown experience?
I sure can. What they look for first is, can they afford it? Typically. Next to that is, what are all the fun things that you get to do in this building? So it's typically the new shiny bauble that they'll go to first. And they are every age in our buildings, mostly, that 20 to 35-year-old range, but we do have older people in our buildings like me. And I think that they look for being closer to work if they work downtown, but also when they're not working, they enjoy all the fun that they can have in the flats on East 4th, on West 6th. So there's plenty for that age group to grab hold of.
And at the Centennial, you're going to have a mix of market rate and workforce housing. Is it 413 units of workforce that will be like middle income housing?
Correct. So the workforce housing will be about 400 units. We say that because it's a really, really old building and we don't know what's going to happen once we start construction. So approximately 400 units of that workforce housing, and then there will be also market rate housing as well.
I'm interested in hearing the panelists weigh in a little bit on filling the need for that workforce or missing middle housing, because clearly Millennia has been working for a number of years to do this at the Centennial, which granted is an enormous building, but you were looking at doing more than 800 units of workforce housing and ultimately determined that was not feasible, at least not in one building. So what sort of tools do we need to address that missing middle housing need and fill the gap between technical affordable and higher end housing?
Yeah, that's a good question. The way that we at NRP think about workforce housing is based off of percentages of the area median income. We finance most of our affordable development, and Michelle mentioned the Scranton Peninsula project. We also have 200 affordable units under construction in the city of Cleveland right now as well. Using low-income housing tax credits, we're able to serve residents from 30% of the area median income, which is a family of four making about $26,000, up to 80% of the area median income, which is a family of four making about $55,000. We consider that workforce housing. When you think about 80% of AMI, that really is police officers, firefighters, social service workers. That is one tool that we have. Unfortunately, affordable housing costs a lot of money to build. And it's more challenging now than it's ever been to continue to see that affordable development, but that is a tool that exists that we and other developers are already using.
Yeah, and I think for Millennia especially, because we do have so many projects downtown, we have a lot of staff members that could actually live in those affordable units. So we're, between the restaurants that we have and the hotels that we own downtown, we find it a great option for them, again, to live downtown, work downtown, and perhaps get rid of their car.
And I would say with respect to policy, how do we encourage state, local to provide financing for these projects to help the developers pursue more affordable housing since it is so expensive? But if it's something we all know there's a demand for, a need, then Columbus, how can you help us? Federal government, how can you help us? And this is, whatever happens with downtown Cleveland, it will spread to the other neighborhoods as well. So because there's places to build, there's a need to build. And just what you talked about, the Housing Land Trust in Columbus, they control properties. So if our government, local government, started controlling more properties, that can be designated for affordable housing or that missing middle. That would be a great policy change too, to have them give us that direction or give the direction to the developers.
Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there is a proposal in the state budget for a state low-income housing tax credit, so that there is some interest in aspects of this at the state level, though there are other things going on that seem to be a bit of a step backward. Speaking of policy, there's been a lot of talk about looming changes to the City of Cleveland's residential tax abatement policy, which is going to take place January 1st. Parts of downtown and most of the near west side will see reduced levels of abatement for new construction and some requirements around inclusion of more affordable units or for developers to pay a fee in lieu of building those. How is the market responding to these policy changes at this point?
I think we don't know. There's a sunset period to the tax abatement. And then even when that sunset period ends, there's still going to be a number of projects that got through approvals before the tax abatement expired and then are going to be under construction for a couple of years. So unfortunately, we're really not going to see the impact for probably another 2 years of how the market's actually responding. I mean, I will say, we were very happy to see that the abatement, as it stands now, would stay in place for all affordable housing projects. That's absolutely critical to continuing to be able to provide housing for folks who can't afford some of the $2 a square foot rents you see on the near west side.
And I think part of the city's plan is to encourage more development on the east side of the city. This study focused on the downtown and the near west side, but there's still opportunities on the east side. So we don't know what's going to happen. There's been a lot of conversation around it, I'll say that, but we don't know what's going to happen. And there's a plan. It's not like it just happened. Someone said we're going to do this without it being well thought out. So, and I agree that it's going to stay in place for affordable housing. And the thing is, we have so many abatements. What happens when the abatement runs out and people don't plan for that 28% they're spending, because now they have to pay property taxes in addition to that 28% of their income?
I'm pretty sure Scott could talk for a long time about what happens
I don't want to
on
bore anyone with
affordable
that.
properties.
No, I mean, I think it's challenging, right? Cleveland is unfortunately not a strong market, and development still needs to be propped up. I think it's really exciting in the mayor's budget that came out last week to see some of the large investments on the east side for things like parks and transit. 'Cause we often get trapped in this loop where we talk about tax abatements and TIFs as the only tool that incentivizes development, economic development, apartments, businesses, but investing in infrastructure, making neighborhoods safer, providing public amenities that people want to be on and want to interact with, that is an incredibly valuable tool as well. I'll use the Scranton Peninsula project as an example. The investment in the towpath trail on the Red Line Greenway and then Irishtown Bend, those are all absolutely critical to that development happening. Without those investments, without seeing people jogging and biking down the towpath trail when it's nice outside every weekend, it's really hard to envision that peninsula as something that could be activated and as something that could look different.
Teresa mentioned, investments on the east side. The study did focus on downtown and the near west side. I'm curious, there's a lot happening between Cleveland State's master plan, the evolution of the St. Vincent campus, and major investments in the Superior Arts District right now. How can we better connect downtown to neighborhoods to the east, both physically and kind of psychologically?
Well, that's a good question. How can we do that? So we have to spur development in all directions. I think not just one, Tremont, Ohio City, the past 5 to 7 years, and it's worked, it's great. I think it's having conversation with those on the east side, what's there. And I think this study only takes us to East 30th, that they consider that, when we see east side. But you look at CSU, what they are doing with student housing and expanding. How do we connect downtown with University Circle and all those other neighborhoods in there to make them walkable and inviting?
The other question I had was sort of about being competitive versus collaborative. So sometimes people are like, okay, are people moving from downtown apartments to apartments in Ohio City? Are we just cannibalizing one market, or is this a rising tide lifts all boats? What do you guys think?
I think there is a way to be collaborative in this, for sure, so everybody rises to the top. Millennia and NRP actually have a school here that for property management, and so we were really excited to open that up. So I think there was room for collaboration I think that everybody wants to succeed, and there's a way for everybody to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think the downtown, I'll call it downtown proper, and the near west side, so the greater downtown, I think are complementary, not necessarily, they don't necessarily need to be competitive. They provide different housing types, different living experiences that people are going to want. A 22-year-old moving to Cleveland after college may want to live downtown, and by the time they're 27, 28, they may want to live in a neighborhood like Tremont or Detroit Shoreway, where they can get a little bit more space. I think they're definitely complementary, and going back to the study, again, the study shows that the demand is there, and I think when you look at the occupancy rates between downtown proper and the near west side, the difference is not desire to live in one place or the other. I think the difference is actually quality and new construction. The only apartments in downtown proper that are struggling with occupancy rates are the ones that have not been updated in 10 or 15 years.
Right.
And I think having some better transportation. So for the folks that live downtown that don't have cars, just a better way to get over there, I think is really important.
If you could each add one amenity, either a physical investment or something programmatic downtown to improve the quality of life, what would it be?
So I thought about this one actually. When we had the RNC here, downtown Cleveland was so activated. All of our green spaces, you had so many, not just the visitors, people coming to downtown Cleveland. And when the RNC left, there was so many activities on Public Square. And it became a destination. People would just come hang out there. During the holiday seasons, we used to do a lot more. People would want to come hang out downtown on New Year's Eve. Not necessarily now, but I would say activating Public Square 24/7, making it a destination place for those in the suburbs, their families. On the weekends, instead of you doing something where you live out in Solon or something, oh, we're going to go hang out downtown. And you provide the transportation, make it accessible on the RTA. I think it's just, for me, I think that would be key.
Yes. I think.
Wait, are you taking hers? Can you
No.
do that?
No, I think that to your point, programs is the most important part of that. It's activating the space that we have. You mentioned Public Square, I'd add them all in. There's no reason on a Saturday when it's 68 degrees outside and sunny that you shouldn't see a lot of people out there. You walk and you drive down there, you see 4 people walking their dogs. There should be programming regularly and reliably to actually get folks down there. I think we always need more and we always need improvement, but we have a lot of assets downtown that I think we're just not tapping into from a programmatic perspective.
Yeah. And I also think that you have to ask the people who live downtown and the people in the suburbs somehow to figure out a way, what is it that they're looking for in order to want to come downtown? Because there are groups who believe that somebody will come downtown because of X, and people don't come down for that because they don't see any value in it, or they don't appreciate that. So whatever that thing is, because I can't think of one thing. There's many things, but having those questions answered by the people who you want to activate the space with.
I'm going to open it up to the audience now to see if anybody out there has questions.
Appreciate the conversation. There's been a lot of discussion about housing. So if we're going to bring these people downtown, where are they going to shop? What are we going to do about retail? We talk about people coming downtown. As a child, I remember coming downtown specifically to shop. And I think until we start dealing with that situation, I think we're going to still have people questioning whether or not they should come down.
I totally agree with that. We obviously saw a decline in retail since the pandemic. We've started to build that back up. It's a conversation that we have with DCA often, looking at that Euclid corridor and putting something in place to bring the retail back. There has to be some incentive for them to come back downtown. There has to be a way for, I think we talked about helping the developer with tenant allowance costs so that somebody can come and build out in those spaces. These older buildings, it's very expensive to white box them, so usually you're getting, a warm, dark shell, and people can't visualize what that will look like. And so, having that ability to provide them with renderings of the space and then providing them enough tenant allowance to actually build it out according to what they want.
I should just add quickly that the Downtown Cleveland Alliance is in the early stages of working on a strategic retail plan for downtown, so there's going to be more news on that at some point down the road.
Hello everyone, Paul Herdig, Cuyahoga County. I am stepping on someone. Should I defer?
Oh, no, I was just trying to tell David there's someone way in the back.
I'll be short.
Hand up.
I just want to ask everyone, let's say that Cuyahoga County Council was about to form a new Department of Housing and Community Development, which they probably will next week, and put my friend and longtime colleague Sarah Parks Jackson in charge of that, which they probably will next week. What advice would you have for Sarah as leader of this newly formed housing department to help continue this work to improve the downtown housing market?
So first of all, and Paul, thank you for the question. Good seeing you. Let's not reinvent the wheel. The work has been done, and how do we collaborate? GCP, DCA, and just in advance, I did say to Beishu, what happens after today? And he will talk about that in his remarks because we've read, the study's been done, we've read the study, and we know what's needed based on the study. How do we move it forward? What's the next step? And we have to have the leadership to make that happen, to make these policy changes on all levels. But I say, don't reinvent the wheel, and there's so many groups represented here. I represent DCA, I represent Cleveland Neighborhood Progress Inc. We all want to see changes, but let's not start all over because that's what holds up progress, just starting all over. That's my political thought.
So I would add in, if the department, the hypothetical is specifically housing and community development, I think there's lots that the county can do. I think the most important thing for them to recognize is that any subsidies, any dollars they're putting into retail, to affordable housing to make these projects happen, and the same is true for the city of Cleveland. It's a small part of a very complicated large capital stack. And I think collaboration between the county, the city, and the state to figure out how to align all of these different incentives that exist is going to be the most critical part of that. Not to keep going back to our neighbors to the south, but I know in Franklin County, they've also started a couple years ago a transit-oriented affordable housing development fund at the county level, which has been enormously beneficial, and in a lot of cases has sort of been the last little bit of the capital stack that projects have needed to get over the finish line. And I think for the Ronayne administration of the county, I think that's, those are two things that really check their boxes.
I'm interested to know, I know that this study was concentrated on obviously downtown and the near west side, but are the findings, are there any comparisons to the rest of the city of Cleveland in particular, or out in the greater, within the inner ring suburbs or larger than that? Just wondering if the needs are, if we feel like the needs are different, and if so, how?
So I can answer that, but I think Michael Deemer should. Well, the short answer is no. The study did not focus outside of the downtown, greater downtown, and near west side. And your question was one of your questions were some of my questions as well. And I did tell my team, I said, well, don't be surprised if I talk about the east side, the south side, because those areas are lacking as well. And great question, what are the needs? Because some of those, the needs are different, but we still need affordable, we still need workforce housing and market rate. I mean, but where and how do we address all of those issues? So with Paul's group and with the city's department, county's department, that's what everyone should be working on. So I would recommend a study to look at outside of the central business, downtown Cleveland neighborhood and the near west side. Those areas are doing quite well, but you can go east, you can go south, and those areas are not. And how do we incentivize developers such as yourselves to go to those areas? And why aren't you in those areas?
Well, we're in some of those areas because we have some project-based Section 8 housing in those areas. And so, Millennia buys properties that are typically really poorly run. They usually have an owner who sucks out all the money and then sells it. And our philosophy is if your mom or your sister or your dad wouldn't live in it, then it's not good enough. And so we renovate those buildings or those apartments into usually using tax credits, but it is Section 8 housing for those people who live there. And so we are in some of those neighborhoods. Some of the things that also are worrisome for us in some of those areas are probably the same as what we have downtown, is being safe and secure, right? So we've had many incidents at those properties, and we try to recover from it as fast as we can, but it's hard not only for our staff but for the residents as well. And just like downtown, things can happen to me downtown, or they can happen to whoever works downtown and is walking around. Those small incidents where just something small happens that seems scary or frightening can turn people away. So we have to try to minimize that when we have guests here in downtown, and for the workers who live downtown to at least have the perception of feeling safe and secure.
I would just add in, Teresa, we're in those neighborhoods as well. We have an affordable development leasing up in Slavic Village and another one under construction in Glenville right now. I think one of the challenges, one of the many challenges of developing in those areas is the incomes are low enough where even when you're building affordable, that is still de facto market rate in some of those neighborhoods, which makes it really challenging to build the workforce housing, to sort of build that next tier up without even deeper subsidies. I think the point of the question, differences in the markets, what we see and what I see when I'm going to these developments that we have on the east side and on the southeast side is much more than an affordability crisis, there's a quality crisis. There's lots of housing and a lot of it is affordable. A lot of it is also in terrible condition, and it needs to be dealt with in some way. That to me is the most significant difference when you're comparing downtown to the near west side to the east and to the southeast side.
So would you say that more subsidies are needed on the east side and southeast side?
Yes, the gaps in financing for affordable housing development in Detroit Shoreway are large. When you go into Slavic Village, to Huff, to Glenville, the gaps are even larger. So yes, this is the short answer to your question. More subsidies would be needed.
Sorry, I took over your moderating.
No, that's fine.
Upon coming to CSU, I met a lot of people from a lot of different communities across Cleveland. I grew up in Strongsville, and I met some friends that grew up in Shaker Heights. And one thing that they said to me is they said, "We're from Cleveland, you're from Strongsville, you're from somewhere else." And I think that attitude is partially promoted by the infrastructural inequities, in the sense that Shaker Heights has 2 train lines. Strongsville has a bus that comes like once a day, maybe, if you're lucky. And so for that reason, I think Strongsville shares a lot more in common with its relationship to Cleveland as more exurban communities like Medina or Lorain, or all the way up in Geauga County. So what initiatives have been made, or are you thinking of to make those exurban communities feel like there's something for them in Cleveland, something to return to, or at least be connected to? Even if somebody from Strongsville doesn't move downtown, how do they get more involved?
So I think it goes back to what's the one thing you would want to see downtown as an amenity that's not here currently. Like we said, there's not just one thing. We have to have the retail. We have to have the malls engaged. We have to put things into place that that from the suburbs sound very, very appealing. You know, we have a beautiful Playhouse Square. What can we do to encourage people to come to that area? What can we do to encourage people to come to more Cavs games and more Indians games and more football games, and then feel connected to downtown in that way? So and that goes back to, what do people want? And it shouldn't just be a small group of people deciding what should be downtown. It's a large group of people, both from downtown and the suburbs.
So first, I empathize with you hearing that you're not from Cleveland. I've been in Cleveland for 5 years, and I think I've got another 25 to go before I'm a Clevelander. But no, I think you're exactly right. A lot of it is programming, and I think a large part of that is also safety, actual safety, and the perception of safety. When you talk about getting people to live downtown, the perception is in some cases more important.
Thanks, everybody. As a person who does commercial real estate development myself, on the multifamily side has been mostly market rate. And frankly, you know, the idea of working with low-end LIHTC credits is, since I've never done it, seems intimidating. What is a way, and we know that that is a need, obviously, based on this discussion and the season, you know, pushing for that. What is a way for somebody like myself or smaller developers or larger developers who work in the market rate area to get resources on how do we even begin to learn how to do this? Because that is our biggest sort of challenge. If we say, hey, we know there's a need here, but how do I go about doing this? Because I come from a background of office flex and self-storage and multifamily market rate. So I don't know where to begin, but we'd love to help.
Well, our owner tells the story of learning about the LIHTC units in the newspaper or an article, and then dove into it, meaning learned everything he could about those tax credits. And one of his first apartment complexes was done with the LIHTC tax credits 25 years ago. So, and I think the story goes on to say that they were honeymooning while they were building this thing, and none of the construction crews showed up, so they had to call in friends to get it done in time. But you have to find good resources to help you, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard and complicated and messy. Once you get the credits and you build the thing, you still have compliance for the next 15 years as well. So it's really challenging. I think that learning about it is obviously a huge first step. Realistically, the LIHTC program has evolved and matured a lot over the last 20 or 25 years. If it's one of those tough things, if you've never done it, you're not going to get to do it. So what I would actually encourage, and this is, you know, I'll get to a more broad comment in a second, is you'd have to partner with someone who's done it before, right? Whether that's as a subcontractor or a co-developer or co-owner, that's really how you get the experience to be able to do those things on your own. I think there's an interesting opportunity at the state level, and we've seen this in some other states of, you know, incentivizing through, you know, competitive scoring criteria, big developers like us to partner with smaller local developers. It's sort of a capacity building way.
I would also recommend Ohio Housing Financing Authority, OFA. They should have something on their website or give them a call. Also, Novogradic puts on a LIHTC seminar every year. It's very popular, well attended. They have lots of resources on their website. You will need a good accountant and a good lawyer experience. You must have that. And then also, I'm the type, I'll call someone randomly sometimes, you know, I'll do that. But Jeff Patterson, who's the CEO of Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority, because they do partner on LIHTC deals, I'm sure he would give you some of your time, some of his time, and if you give me your card, I will introduce the two of you. We do have a need, so that's great that you're interested in learning more and doing more. It can work financially for you, so absolutely.
Good afternoon, Khalid Hawthorne. So, city is trying to put assets back to work, land bank lots, hopefully city parking lots. We talked about strategies, we talked about policies around workforce housing, more home ownership. I also see those as your low-hanging fruit as far as land, the available land. is the next step of this plan actually putting some action, bringing people together to make those things happen as far as workforce housing, or home ownership, things like that, sitting down with the banks and everybody else, or whoever. So, I don't know if that was a question, but.
So that will be answered in the concluding remarks as to the next steps. No, and it's a great question. So no, it will be answered. I don't think we're in the position to answer. Why am I acting like a moderator again? I'm
I gave
sorry.
up my microphone, that's fine. Do we have any more questions? Okay.
My name is Mitch Silvius. I'm going to be a candidate, a Democratic candidate for District 11 Congress. I'm going to be buying a house in East Cleveland in, I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but the place that needs the most help. Not on the outskirts, in the middle. We spoke about fear earlier. You know, we can't have fear. It won't work, because if we're scared, it's just not going to work. Now, I understand some people might have some reasons to have fear, but if we continue to have that, we won't have any development, we won't have any fun. We won't have any people moving there, we won't have any jobs there. So if anyone would like to help me in that, I'm going to be one by one the Cuyahoga Land Bank. I think that's what it's called. I just came from it. As low as $5,000, you can get a house. And if you negotiate and if you do the work yourself, like me, for like $30,000, you can do the whole house. You go one by one by one, change the neighborhood. So that's, I think, how we can change some of those neighborhoods. You just have to do it. So if anyone would like to help me, please let me know.
Well said, thank you.
I think the point that's raised there is a valuable one, just to harp on a little bit for a second. In a lot of Cleveland's more challenged neighborhoods, and we're talking generally outside of downtown here, that the housing stock is so dilapidated that a home, which is supposed to be your largest asset, actually becomes a liability. When you talk about cost for repairs and annual property taxes, it's a real challenge that needs to be addressed.
So we have time for one more question.
You had made a comment earlier about the affordable tax credit that's the state's considering adding to the budget this year. The concern there is that, and I work for the CDC in Detroit Shoreway, and I'm a board member of the CDC in Youngstown. I'm a PhD student here, so I think a lot about this. But earlier this year, before that was proposed, there was two things that happened. There was a decision at the state level to start taxing affordable housing at market rate housing instead of, you know, what the income the buildings or structures are generating. That was one. The second was the cutting or the prevention of being able to layer LIHTC at the federal level with historic tax credits at the state level. Those are two huge things that allow affordable development happening. So I guess the question is how feasible, politically feasible do we think, and what detail do we know about what is being proposed at the state level? Because if we don't have that type of tax credit, then I just don't know how we really do this at scale, like moving forward.
Well, I'll just say that there is a freestanding bill, and it was part of the budget proposal to create a state-level low-income housing tax credit. There's been a lot of energy around it, and the advocates I'm talking to believe that is more feasible now than it ever has been. The governor's clearly very supportive of it. So that seems to have a good runway. But yes, as you mentioned, there's some other things that the state did that took the wind out of the sails of some projects, and I think it remains to be seen what the fallout is like. I don't know if any of you have remarks on that.
So for us to actually take down the entire Centennial, our capital stack is multi-layered. And if we weren't able to use the LIHTC tax credits as well as the historic tax credits, we would not be able to do that project. And I don't know that anybody could do that project. And so one of the most beautiful buildings in Cleveland would sit vacant and distressed.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think the one silver lining in here with the part of the bill that specifically addresses valuation of affordable housing properties is that we have a county auditor and a county more generally that really values affordable housing, and it gives county auditors the option to value affordable housing at a higher level, but it's not an obligation. So Cuyahoga County specifically is generally in safe hands there. It's going to affect more rural areas in a much more impactful way.
Okay, so now we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to hand it off to Beju. Thank you to all the panelists for your participation.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you again to our panelists for that wonderful discussion and to our audience for participating in the Q&A. I also want to thank Dean Anglin and Cleveland State for hosting this session where we can have this important conversation for our community. So from our perspective at Greater Cleveland Partnership, we've completely bought into the vision that downtown is absolutely the front door and living room for our region. As our partner, Michael Deemer, the CEO of Downtown Cleveland Alliance, says, it's the first place where visitors come to get an impression of our region, whether they're visiting just as a tourist, they're visiting to consider living here because of a job opportunity, or they're visiting to consider a business expansion. And it's vital to us that downtown remains that vibrant geography that creates that positive impression, that creates then the opportunity for us to have a deeper relationship with our visitors and eventually, hopefully, future residents and business owners here. That's what led us to really take on this project in partnership with Michael and his team at Downtown Cleveland Alliance. And the good news here is the findings are that the demand exceeds the supply. The demand for housing of all types, as we've talked about in this panel, exceeds supply that's available, but not only in downtown, but in what we are calling greater downtown. That's an incredible opportunity for all of us. And so where we go from here, as Teresa was referring to, is to take this information and convene, as we say, in an all-in manner with our civic partners, our city partners, our county partners, our state partners, certainly our funders and developers, and start to work on the problem solving of how do we capture this opportunity. There are different market dynamics now. We all know that we've had a period of rapid cost increase in the construction markets. We've had a rapid increase in financing rates. And so the economics were always challenging in markets like Cleveland. They've gotten increasingly more challenging in the recent 2-year period, but the opportunity has not left us. That opportunity to frame it for our policymakers, for our funders, for our developers, the opportunity to bring individuals that are new residents, new taxpayers into these geographies is present. And what it takes, though, is a collaborative effort to figure out how we problem solve the different tools that are available, whether it's the credits that we've discussed on this panel or new tools, borrowing even from our neighbors either down south or from around the country, to put that package together so that we don't miss this opportunity. We don't miss this moment where people want to be here of all ages and of all income backgrounds to continue to build a vibrancy of downtown. And so that's something that we are committed to undertaking, again, in partnership with our friends at the Downtown Cleveland Alliance and a number of our other civic system partners. Now, that's one of many efforts that we're involved in, again, with our partners here, with our public partners at the city and the county. Steve Litt recently wrote about something that is near and dear to all of our hearts, which is reconnecting our city to our waterfronts, whether it's to our lake to the north or to the river. That's an important part as well in terms of how we continue to build a more vibrant downtown. And if you want to track all of this as it's going on, I think as many of you know, we rolled out late last year or middle of last year our downtown, or actually our Cleveland development model. So you can track all of these different projects, where they are. You can actually get a future view. It's a 3D model that's virtual, available online for free, that you can see where all these projects are in stages of development and what our future city starts to look like as these buildings come to full fruition. So we invite everyone here to keep connected with us at the Greater Cleveland Partnership, our friends at the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. You can follow us. You can talk to our team members that are here in the audience, and you can engage with us at the reception. But thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and look forward to sharing more updates as we proceed. Thanks.